Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. On this show, we're returning to another of my teenage obsessions. In between Moorcock, Sven Hassel, the myriad of other pulp novels I was getting from Pops, playing Elite on my Specky, and even occasionally venturing out of the house on my Rally Arena, I was simultaneously worried and fascinated by the possibility of World War III, and in particular, I was reading speculative histories of World War III. In the 1980s, there was a mini-genre of speculative movies for both TV and cinema that set out to inform, horrify, or both when it came to the horrors of nuclear war. And multiple series of pulp novels like The Survivalist and others, and of course the best-selling Tom Clancy books. But before those, in the 1970s, came a wave of books written by generals, strategists, academics, journalists, and defence intellectuals, attempting to predict and describe in cold, stark detail how the next World War might actually unfold. And the foremost of these were undoubtedly General Sir John Hackett's The Third World War, August 1985, published in 1978, and its follow-up, The Third World War, The Untold Story, published in 1982. Best-selling pseudo-histories that imagined a NATO Warsaw Pact conflict escalating from conventional war in Europe into a terrifying, if limited, nuclear conflagration. To unpack all this, I'm joined again by Malcom Craig, Senior Lecturer in American History at Liverpool John Moores University and game designer, author of Cold City and Hot War, soon out again in second editions. Malcom specialises in nuclear culture, Cold War politics, proliferation, secrecy, and the political afterlife of the bomb. His work explores not just nuclear policy, but the imaginative and psychological worlds built around it, fears, assumptions, and fantasies that shape how ordinary people understand or understood back in the day the possibility of nuclear war. And an inevitable part of this conversation, which we talked about to a degree last time around, is how nuclear anxiety dominated the cultural zeitgeist for a time, not just through literature and film, but eventually role-playing games, which inevitably brings us to Twilight 2000, something Malcolm's been looking at closely as part of his research. Published in 1984 by Game Designer Workshop, Twilight 2000 imagined a world after a conventional NATO Warsaw Pact war spiralled into a nuclear exchange, total societal breakdown, with players taking the role of stranded soldiers, refugees, scavengers, trying to survive amid the radioactive wreckage of society. And to a degree, the game inherited the same assumptions, aesthetics and military obsessions as books like Hackett's, but in yet more intricate detail, with exhaustive orders of battle, logistics, ammunition counts, fuel shortages, command breakdowns, and a seemingly endless series of manuals of guns and armoured vehicles. The 80s. When teenagers spent their weekends role-playing the aftermath of thermonuclear war while simultaneously believing that it actually happened at any moment. Strange and heady days. So, paint your windows white, stock up on bin liners to bag up your gran, fill all your pans with water, crawl into your inner sanctum, and kiss your arse goodbye as we talk about General Hackett, Cold War futurism, nuclear realism, role-playing the end of the world, and the odd overlap between entertainment and strategic thinking. Welcome back, Malcom, to Derry Toms. It's nice to have you back.
Lovely to be invited back. Great, really looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, and actually not that long since you were here either, when we discussed the robot brains.
And the work of multi-genre writer Sidney J. Bounds. And one of the things I've completely forgotten to do since then is buy more Sidney Bounds book just to see the range of his work.
Yeah, it's something I'm going to have to put on my to-do list, because one of the perils of podcasting is having to constantly do homework for podcasts and never really getting to just read tat for pleasure, and not having to worry about anything else. So I need to do one or two things. One is retire, or two is stop podcasting, or both, or neither.
It's like being academic. You're always reading for research and all that. Even like lying in bed at night, it's some book on God knows what, something obscure and boring for everyone else.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one that we're going to talk about today. Actually, we're going to talk about a couple of things today. That way, because I'm going to call this podcast is going to be a semi-sequel to the one we did on Moorcock's My Experiences in the Third World War. And we're going to call it Our Experiences in the Third World War, because there's a couple of things we're going to talk about. First of all, well, I'll tell you what, before we get to that, how did you become obsessed with the Cold War and the potential of a Third World War? What were your frames of reference as a young'un that got you into this line of work?
Living. So I grew up in Polmont, just outside Falkirk, so in central Scotland, and we were just up the hill from Grangemouth Oil Refinery. That was I think the biggest civilian nuclear target in Scotland in the 1980s, and then just across the river a bit was Forsyth Naval Dockyard.
Yeah.
Plus we had Glasgow and Edinburgh on either side. So as a kid, you kind of knew from adults, and then Threads was screened in 1984. And my parents the story I always tell is that my parents let me watch it and I was terrified. But being a historian who does oral history, I now really doubt my memory. Like, is that just an origin story I've invented for myself to make myself sound more interesting, rather than just like, I don't know, I kind of like the Third World War. So I think that's the Threads thing is part of it, but I really doubt my own memory these days, having interviewed a lot of other people about their memories of that period. But I'm going to go with it.
Yeah.
Living in central Scotland in the 1980s, watching Threads, that was it.
Cracking on in years, you do start to doubt your own memories of things, don't you? Because with Threads, I always say my parents wouldn't let me stay up to watch it, but a teacher of ours put it on one of those huge tellers that you had on the big silver legs on casters with the doors. So we had double English, and he sat us down and put Threads on. And I'm absolutely convinced that happened, right? But sometimes I think, was double English 2 half-hour lessons or 2 1-hour lessons? Because would he have fit all of Threads? But I have this vivid memory of watching Threads in a classroom on that TV. But also, when you watch Threads again, there is a scene in that where kids are watching something on one of those TVs.
Things at the end.
So my brain is starting to melt with all this. But I do know that when it first came out on DVD and I went and bought it, I had seen it before. I can't have seen it any other way, because I don't think well, of course, people commonly had VHS, didn't they? But I don't remember having it on VHS. I don't remember anybody I knew having it on VHS. Otherwise, when we were massive stoners, we would have been daring each other to take acid and watch it. So it's a really fucking good job that we didn't have it on VHS, because that would have been horrific. So we just stuck with our half dozen VHS cassettes, one of which was Watership Down and This Is Spinal Tap on the same tape, and another one was RoboCop and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we just kind of stuck to those things. But so I must have seen it at school. But yeah, so Threads, that kind of kickstarts your obsession. For me, living in Hull was one of the most bombed cities in the UK in World War II anyway, so there was always that sense in Hull of being a town that had been bombed to the Stone Age almost. Everywhere you went when I was a kid, there was wasteland, and you didn't really understand as a kid. It's all been redeveloped now, but you didn't really understand as a kid. The reason why there's all that wasteland and all those patches where there's like cement floors and ruined walls and bushes and undergrowth is because that was all bombed shitless during World War II. So there was that idea in World War that Hull had this history with bombing. So once you start to think about that, you start to think, if this did happen again, if the balloon did go up, what would happen to Hull? And you suddenly think, right, you talk to people, well, it's a deep sea port on the eastern seaboard. It's got a 7-mile long or whatever refinery a couple of miles out of the city centre. It's going to be toast. It's going to be toast.
And you look at kind of like Soviet targeting maps from that era, and that's exactly, just all of these places are just, I think, it's one of the things that per land area, the UK had a greater megatonnage of nuclear weapons targeted at it during the Cold War than any other place on Earth. I think, I can't remember my source for that, but there was a huge number of targets packed into the UK, civilian and military. So
that's what we get for being Airstrip 1, isn't it?
Exactly. And I mean, in 1954, one of the fascinating things, it wouldn't even take that many nuclear bombs to destroy British society. I mean, William Strath back in 1955, his report to the government, 10 megaton bombs down the west coast of Britain. He said, that's it, British society's done. were over as a country. And it terrified the government at the time. It wasn't declassified until 2002, 2003, something like that. So that was 10 megaton bombs.
Yeah.
I mean, big bombs, but, compared to what was going to be targeted at the UK. So, yeah. But it was a strange time to kind of grow up in as a child, being aware via adults and via popular culture.
Yeah.
That all of this was in the background.
I can vividly remember if you turned the telly on and nothing came on. It was like there was just a brief interruption to a broadcast or something. You'd think, "Oh shit, is it happening?"
Yeah.
And then Clopper Castle would come on, and you'd be like, "Oh right, it's not happening. Okay, we're all right. We're all right for another day. So we'll get to Clopper Castle tomorrow." Yeah. So this whole threads business, and of course, I think we talked on my experiences in the Third World War episode, that it was shot through music as well. Man at CNN, all these songs that were in the charts, all about the stuff. 99 Red Balloons, Two Tribes. Yeah. It was everywhere, wasn't it? But I happen to know, because we've discussed it before, that there are two specific cultural touch points that we both were aware of and probably got into to some degree or other. And the first was the books of General John Winthrop Hackett.
Yes.
So the first was The Third World War, August 1985.
Did we both have the same? Oh, slightly different covers.
Now, I do have the one that you've got. This is a ridiculous admission to make, but I make this admission all the time. I've got the one you've got, and I've got another copy of this one, which is the sequel, The Third World War, The Untold Story.
I've got that edition. Yeah, there we go.
So I've got these twice now, because I bought these again late last year when we were having a conversation or via Blue Sky messaging or whatever the hell it was. So my old copies of these were long gone. I've no idea what happened to them. They probably went to Oxfam when I moved from Hull to Bradford. And I've got them. And I know they're in the house somewhere, but I couldn't find them. So I went on eBay and got them again. So some lucky patron will be receiving these in the post at some point. But yes, The Third World War, August 1985, by General Sir John Hackett. Now, who was John Hackett?
So Hackett is a highly decorated British military officer. Well, he is born in Australia, Perth, I think it is, and then he joins the British Army, and he's highly decorated. He serves in World War II. He's in a huge number of the major campaigns. He parachutes into Arnhem as part of the failed Operation Market Garden, and he's seriously injured quite a lot. Yeah. He also gets a lot of medals.
He gets injured all the fucking time, doesn't he?
He's either, I think one of the things that they said, he's either, when he goes into battle, he's either seriously injured or mentioned in dispatches. Yeah. It's one of the two. So, highly decorated military officer. And then, in the 1960s onwards, he kind of develops this new career as a public defence intellectual. Or kind of this military thinker about military affairs. So there's various publications, but also doing a lot of writing to newspapers. He writes really long open letters to the major newspapers of record in the UK, advocating for increased readiness, defence, preparedness, conventional preparedness, all of that kind of thing. So by the time we get to the mid to late 1970s and he starts working on the Third World War, he's already a reasonably well-known figure in kind of circles that are kind of thinking about the Cold War and future war and all of these kind of things.
Yeah, for any military buff who's listening, and I know we do have some people listening who listen regularly, who love their World War II stuff and love their characters and love all this. So for any military buff, he was quite the guy. So I looked him up earlier on just to pull out some bullet points. So Military Cross awarded in 1941 for service in Syria and Lebanon, where he was severely wounded.
Yes.
A tanker at the Battle of Sidi Rezegh airfield, where he was severely wounded when his Stuart tank got hit by enemy fire. Whilst recuperating, helped set up the long-range desert group, which would go on one way or another to exist as the SAS. And as he said, he was commander of the 4th Parachute Brigade at Arnhem, where he was severely wounded.
Injured.
Escaped German captivity, hidden by a Dutch family for months until he recovered sufficiently to make it back through the lands to Allied positions. And he wrote a book about that as well, which I now must read, so I've ordered it. I found a copy for £3, so I've ordered that.
Bargain.
Yeah, and then after various other postings and studying, he was actually in charge of the British Army of the Rhine between 66 and 68. Now, his retirement coincides with one of those letters being published in the Times.
Yes.
Where he castigated the then government for failing to adequately support NATO forces in Europe, and signed the letter not as a commander in the British Army, but as an officer of NATO.
Yeah.
Which must have absolutely infuriated the government and the Minister of Defence at the time.
Yeah.
And then after that, he retired from his position as a principal of King's College and wrote this book. So he should have known his stuff, shouldn't he? Really?
And it's important to emphasise this book isn't just Hackett.
Yeah.
There's
a long list.
It's Hackett and others, and it's a pretty much it's almost the kind of like a who's who of pro-defence, pro-NATO, anti-Soviet kind of journalists and ex-military and ex-intelligence crowd. So like Air Chief Marshal Sir John Barraclough, Brigadier Ken Hunt, Vice Admiral Sir Ian McGeoch, who was the editor of the Naval Review, Norman McRae, who had been deputy editor of The Economist and was another kind of like public intellectual in these things,
and
John
an RAF
Strawson
veteran as well,
Bernard Burroughs. But there's also, there's really interesting, there's a bunch of other people who aren't, like, they're not listed as these direct contributors, but who did contribute to it. So there's Colonel, and I can always forget his first name, Colonel Dupuy, who was an American colonel who gave a lot of feedback on the first draft of this book, which was really different. John Erickson, who was a military historian at the University of Edinburgh, and was a historian of the Red Army.
Yeah.
Erickson was because he was invited to the Soviet Union to lecture the Soviet armed forces on their own history.
Yeah.
And he was sometimes kind of acted as a conduit between the Soviet military and the British military and all that kind of thing. Erickson's a really interesting figure as well. So there's all these kind of direct named contributors, but there's basically this constellation of defence thinkers and analysts, ex-military, pundits, all of these kind of things contributing to it. So Hackett writes the framing story initially and then completely rewrites it based on what Dupuy says. He writes this framing story and then other people just contribute their own little building blocks to it to flesh out the entire tale.
Yeah, because a lot of it does come across like, projected essays, doesn't it? Because, for people who are listening, what is this book? It's essentially a book written as a compiled history after the conclusion of the Third World War. So written in 1978, purports to be, I think, an account or a history written in the years after 1985.
So 1987, it's meant to be written and based on a war that takes place in 1985.
Yeah, and so it is like a series of accounts and essays, and it's Now, as a kid, one of the things I enjoyed most about Twilight 2000 back in the day, and we'll get to Twilight 2000, was the projection of how the World War III conflagration came about. I thought that was always one of the most fun parts of reading a Twilight 2000 rule book or a GM's book or whatever. So if you dug that, then these Hackett books are just pure smack, aren't they? Because they're that expanded out to, 300 plus pages in the first one and a lot more in the second one. When you combine these two volumes together, you've got about an 800-page version of the 3 pages you get in the Twilight 2000 Games Master's Manual. And it's written by people who really fucking know the stuff. It's incredible read for a teenager.
There's two. So I mean, it's two of the things there. It's like rereading it for research purposes and for this. I'm struck by. I'd forgotten precisely how detailed it was.
Yeah.
But also how boring it can be. Because it is really. I mean, so it is. You've got to approach it in a sense of it's a novel. I mean, it's creative non-fiction, but it's a novel, an episodic novel nonetheless. And it's that, and we'll get on to what this book leads to and the entire genre it gives rise to in terms of fiction. But it's so full of, like Twilight 2000, military acronyms, detailed descriptions of technology, all of this thing. I've still found myself flicking to the bit that tells you what all the acronyms are. Like, who are these people? It is...
It's quite unforgiving, isn't it?
Yeah, unless you're really into the minutiae of this stuff. Because, I mean, a huge part of it is they were advocating for these new conventional technologies to improve NATO's chances of resisting a Warsaw Pact invasion of Europe. So they go into kind of like, this drooling fanboy detail over tanks that aren't quite like the M1 Abrams isn't in service yet, but it's going to be coming in. Ooh, wonder tank, and all that kind of stuff. So there's so much detail, but you never get a sense of people.
Yeah.
You never really get a sense of people in it.
They even refer to it as the XM1 prototype, I think, don't they? In the first book. I distinctly remember reading it for the first time, and the first couple of chapters, I think, are accounts from, I don't know, a British Javelin platoon or a German Leopard 2 platoon, and generally it's like, oh, they're coming, oh my god, waves of T-72s, oh, my gunner's head's been blown off, I better get out of here. And I do always distinctly remember, and I always think of a frame of artwork from a very early 2000 AD episode of, I think it was the first Bill Savage strip was Invasion, wasn't it? And there was like loads of T-72s on Salisbury Plain. And when you get these like descriptions of this like mass of black steel coming towards this Javelin platoon and all these T-72s, it really does reinforce this idea that at the time that there was this real kind of the esteem in which Soviet hardware was held by the West as terrifying weapons of war. It really kind of comes out in these accounts.
And I think one of the things there is actually another thing I was doing in preparation for this is watching old like 1970s and 80s British Army of the Rhine training films.
Right.
Actually, really interesting. It was fascinating insight into and the ways in which they very openly talk about, okay, you're a chieftain tank crew. You've got odds of 10 to 1.
Yeah.
There's going to be 10 T-72s for one of you, so you need to be, bang on the money. And it is that kind of like, we are going to be facing this wall of armour coming through the Fulda Gap. And again, I mean, this leads into that we must improve our technology. We can't beat them on numbers, therefore we must beat them in terms of the technological battlefield as well.
Yeah, of course, what we've known subsequently from years and years later when all this information has been released is that 4 out of 10 of those challengers probably wouldn't have even started. Sorry, not challengers, the chieftains. Probably wouldn't have even started and started rumbling down the road because they were all knackered all the time.
No, fun fact, actually, I was watching a thing from the Tank Museum at Bovington recently where they were interviewing former chieftain crew and about the L60 engine.
Yeah.
And how, like, dreadful reputation.
Because it was a mixed fuel engine, a dual fuel engine that was supposed to be able to run on diesel and petrol.
Petrol or whatever, nail polish remover, whatever you want to put in it. And, there was the old joke about, like, the chieftain's the best tank in the world, provided it breaks down in the right place. But these crew were actually going, it's like, no. Actually, if you did your job as a tank crew, serviced it regularly and ran it hard, it was fine.
Ah, interesting.
It's the ones that sat for 3 months in a tank park and then they tried to set them out and the radiators explode and the seals piss oil everywhere and all that kind of thing. So they were saying, it was really, these two guys were saying, no, if we ran our tanks hard and they were fine, we didn't have the problems with them. It was the ones that were stored. And then they brought them out. Just that's a wee kind of like, fact. I'm not really into military hardware. I just like watching stuff from the Tank Museum. I don't know why.
I do like Tank Museum videos myself, I must admit. There's a YouTube channel where guys restore tanks.
Yes.
Just some guys, seemingly just some young guys who live on a farm somewhere. And they'll do an hour-long video of them, working to get... A chieftain's been sat in a field for 25 years, and over the course of a 45-minute video with them arsing about and oiling things and putting new filters in, they get it running. which is quite a satisfying program, YouTube channel to watch. But yeah, so it's a really fascinating read. It does have its boring bits.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to the chapter on the destruction of Birmingham,
Birmingham,
which is the other bit that really sticks out in my memory,
and the paragraph on the destruction of Minsk.
Oh yes, but of course we'll get to this as well. But in the second one, you get the equivalent of the Birmingham paragraph,
yes,
where they really expand on the Minsk situation.
Yes.
Yeah. And so there are some intriguing assumptions made because, of course, this is written in 1978. Right, we're projecting what could possibly happen in a build-up to a world war. So some of the things that really leap out on a reread all these years later. Jimmy Carter gets his second term, and he's referred to frequently as a lame duck president, and that their attitude towards him doesn't appear particularly positive.
No.
What was the military establishment's view of Carter?
Well, Carter actually. So when Carter kind of comes into the presidency, his first year in the presidency, he's really at odds with all the other Cold War presidents because he wants to look beyond the Cold War. His thing is, human rights, nuclear non-proliferation, cutting down on conventional arms sales, addressing poverty, all of these kind of. He wants to address these major global issues. Those are these themes. And he said, and if our allies are committing human rights abuses, then we're going to castigate them just as much as our enemies.
Yeah.
So, and some observers actually refer to, because this is happening during détente, the thaw, well, it's the dying embers of détente, the thaw between the USA and the USSR and the USA and China, and between East and West Europe. Carter is referred to by some observers as America's first post-Cold War president. Because some people view him as like, maybe we are getting beyond the so-called bipolarity of the Cold War. Carter cuts a lot of defence programmes when he comes to power. So things like the B-1 bomber, meant to be like supersonic Mach 2 swing wing hyper bomber, cancelled. I mean, they bring it back later in a much cheaper version that still is in service now. So Carter cuts a lot of defence programmes, which makes him unpopular with the defence establishment and also defence contractors. Like, Rockwell are going, hey, we're going to make billions selling B1s. Oh no, we're not going to be able to sell B1s anymore. So there is that. But he becomes, as détente kind of dies, Carter becomes much more hawkish. He becomes much more of a traditional Cold War president from about 1978 onwards. A lot of that's to do with the global situation. It's geopolitics. It's the influence of stuff happening. But also his national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's Polish born, and he's quite hawkish. He's very anti-Soviet. I think understandable for someone who is of Polish extraction to be what the Soviet Union inflicted upon Poland at the end of the war, and then also communist control of Poland. Brzezinski is very anti-communist, and he exerts more influence on Carter as time goes on. So, and Carter does kind of become, in 1980, he is kind of a lame duck. President, the second oil crisis, the failed rescue of the hostages in Iran in 1980, Operation Eagle Claw. Nothing goes right for him. I've researched. My first book was on Carter and nuclear non-proliferation. I actually like Jimmy Carter as a person.
Yeah,
I think he's a much better president than people give him credit for. But he ends up. One of the big things about the 1980 election is Reagan going, well, look, Carter's made us look weak on the world stage. We're losing the war against the Soviets. Vote for me. Star Wars. Well, he doesn't say Star Wars at that point. Star Wars isn't around to 1983, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Hackett and Co. don't manage to predict Carter losing the election. In fact, they have him getting a second election. But he successfully steers the Middle East peace process to a successful conclusion, which is interesting. We've got the Shah of Iran still in place and in power. And a nuclear power, thanks to a French brokered nuclear weapon, which is fascinating. Another thing, communism spread from Cuba to dominate the Caribbean. So you have Soviet-backed Jamaican and Cuban forces deployed in Africa in support of anti-South African movements, which is just, if you're going to do an alternate history, I'd love to do an alternate history game about a load of communist-backed Jamaican soldiers in Zimbabwe or something, Rhodesia. Yeah.
Well, no, they're basing that on, so in Angola, you had the Angola and Namibia in the late 1970s. You have the after independence from Portugal in 1975, you get these various factions. You have the kind of like Marxists, then the Maoists, and then you have the American-aligned group and everything. So this apartheid South Africa is supporting one side, China are involved in the other side. And it's not really the Soviets that are supporting them, it's the Cubans that are supporting. And there's about 40, at one point there's about 40,000 Cuban troops in Angola. It's incredible. The Cubans involved. I mean, Che Guevara went to the Congo in the 1960s and pretty much caused a bloodbath. While he was there. They draw upon. One of the fascinating things about this, one of the many fascinating things about this book is Hackett's timing is brilliant. It's blind luck that they bring out this book that's so speculative. It's a work of speculative fiction, but their timing is brilliant. 78, détente is dying, the Cold War is resurging. Thatcher comes to power. May 1979 election. I mean, in the book, he has a female British Prime Minister called Mrs. Plummer. Ho ho ho, and Hackett starts to look like a sage. He starts to look like this guy who really can predict the future. He can see what's happening with the world. And this book sells millions. And it's translated into multiple languages. It goes all over the world. It's hugely popular.
Another one of the things that really amuses me about this book is when it gets to... But basically, it postulates that the welfare state and the politics of envy cripple British war capability.
Yes.
Which I think if you've got a load of, members of an old gentleman's club, ex-admirals and generals and brigadiers, they are all going to sit round and probably grumble about the state of Britain and why we aren't spending more on warfare and less on benefits. Yeah,
but that's all of these guys that wrote this are... They're kind of the classic old school high Tories. They all have those political leanings. That much is entirely obvious. So I mean, they really do go for the welfare state in this. That section, they're like, it's bringing Britain down. We're going to fall to the Soviets.
I'm going to read a bit of it. I don't know which one of them it was that wrote this bit, but it says, Britain had its own special problems. Withdrawal from empire had been unsettling. Swift though this had been in the 25 years since the Second World War, insufficient time had elapsed by 1975 to allow a complete recovery of national balance in the new role of a second-class power with negligible overseas possessions. An extraordinary obsession in the people of Britain with the redistribution of wealth, rather than its creation, had done much in the same period to cripple national enterprise. This had gone hand in hand with the encouragement of general reliance upon state-provided welfare in place of the reliance upon themselves, which had previously been characteristic of the British, while there had also been an ugly and unscrupulous exploitation of the politics of envy. It began to be increasingly clear, however, even to those politicians whose hearts were stronger than their heads, that national welfare depended on national wealth, and that the state produced nothing to distribute. At the same time, the massive burden of British trade unionism began to prove unwelcome to the working people who had to bear it. Of the desirability of combination to promote and protect the interests of workers, once the Industrial Revolution had opened the door to the predatory instincts and the restless, innovatory genius of an island race of adventurers. And there can be little doubt. The importance of the protection afforded to the workers by the unions and the benefit this brought them in the early days can hardly be exaggerated. It was when the blind benevolence of politicians had allowed the unions to move outside the law, when a proper watchfulness on the union side had given way to unimaginative Luddism, when reaction and restrictive practices were putting a savage brake on enterprise, when activities originally intended to improve living standards were now seen to be doing just the opposite, that the majority of the nation who did not belong to trade unions began to be increasingly resentful of their subjection to the minority who did. Although, as events in Britain in the mid-70s showed, politicians in a parliamentary democracy can go on governing for some time in a manner unpopular with the people as a whole, they cannot go on doing this indefinitely. Attempts at confrontation with the power of the trade unions made by both the political main parties, which each in its turn was in power, had been total failures. Up to the mid-70s, public opinion in Britain was not yet sufficiently aware of the menace from Union power to face the discomforts of standing up to it, and the attempts of both parties to diminish it were dropped. Oh, bloody dull scum and miners. How dare they? I think Hackett and Code spent too much time watching Carry On at Your Convenience.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah. I'm a toilet fitter, not a B-day fitter. This is what's bringing down the British Army of the Rhine.
Yep. And that section is, I think it's one of those sections in the book that really, it lays bare the politics. I mean, the politics of it are entirely obvious from the get-go. Yeah. But that really lays bare the kind of, I think, almost the quite distinctly parochial politics that informs it, because it's a bunch of kind of, there are all these Buffton Tuftons sitting in a club with a glass of whiskey going, like bloody Jack Jones and all that kind of business. That piece is. I remember I was rereading it and actually laughing out loud. Yeah, because it's great.
Yeah, I was having a great laugh. There are a lot of really, really good things in here. There's some remarkably on the nail stuff here as well during the build up to war. One example that there's painstaking length. They produce the what do they call it? The Ryabukin report.
Oh yes,
so it's a report from a Soviet academic for the Politburo ahead of the inauguration of the new populist Republican president-elect in 1983. And there's some cracking bits in it. So they're thinking about how do we bring these capitalists low?
Yes.
It says, unfortunately, we cannot precisely repeat the Bay of Pigs because the United States is not preparing to invade anywhere unsuccessfully during the early days of the Thompson administration. We should therefore try to set up situations where President Thompson, in his early days, will be forced to order or accept a retreat by America and its allies from a situation created by us. A Thompson retreat of this sort should be engineered in order to check a possible momentum of revolt, which may otherwise begin to be felt by the Soviet Union. At risk, if there is no such early retreat, may be the lives and livelihoods of many who work within the governing structure of the Soviet Union and its allies. If a momentum of revolt were to spread from Poland, many would indeed go to bed each night fearing that they might be shot in a coup d'etat the next morning. There is little likelihood that the United States will risk the desolation of the planet by nuclear action simply because we have provoked the president, and it is unlikely to allow possibly less stable allies like Iran to risk doing so either. On the contrary, as Thompson has to operate in accordance with a public opinion which will grow scared much more quickly than our own censor-protected public opinion will do, he will order retreats at a much earlier stage than we. A straightforward threat of nuclear holocaust carries little conviction. On the other hand, to hint at escalation towards it offers great advantage to the USSR. We should make constant use of this. When we have brought about 1 or 2 Thompson retreats, we should flatter the new president and move back towards détente. We should not even insist on keeping all the ground gained for our Egyptian and other allies, some of whom might become inconveniently big for their boots, during the initial Thompson retreats. We should also play upon the president-elect's vanity by manoeuvring the lame duck Carter administration into taking some of the preliminary steps in preparation for a possible war before Thompson's inauguration day on the 20th of January. Then we should proclaim on Inauguration Day that the Democratic administrations have always started wars in American history, while Republican administrations have always stopped them, and make Thompson feel he is a great peacemaker instead of the weak demagogue he is. This desirable timetable means that we need to move quickly. Well.
Scary stuff.
Well. Whoa. Yeah, it seems like they've always had a handle on how to deal with a populist Republican president. One consumed by vanity and narcissism.
There's a really interesting... Like most of these books, Hackett and Co., it's the Soviet Union that starts the war. You know, most of it's them, not us. It's always them. The other kind of one of the really important things about this, I keep saying that one of the really important things about this.
There's a lot of important things about this. But one of them,
the context into which this emerges, because you're dealing with a bunch of guys who are fairly well informed, ex-military journalists, former intelligence people, all that kind of crowd. And throughout the 1970s, there has been, in the US and the UK, and elsewhere as well, but the US and the UK is what I mostly know about. In the US, you have this deep-seated concern that détente has left the USA weak, and that institutions like the CIA have fundamentally underestimated the power of the Soviet Union. Now, the flip side is actually true. Fundamentally overestimated the power of the Soviet Union consistently. So in the mid-1970s, you have these kind of like groups emerge, like Committee on the Present Danger, which is a bunch of different kind of intellectuals, politicians, military types, all sorts of get together to say, we need to actually prepare ourselves because détente has made us weak. The Soviets are still a threat. We need to do something about it. We need to warn about this. And that is what the present danger is. There was actually, in the 1950s, there was a previous Committee on the Present Danger, but the two aren't connected. And then also you have, within intelligence circles in the US, and I think this is the kind of thing that really informs contextually what's going on here, is the Team B exercise, where, again, a lot of people involved with the Committee on the Present Danger are like, nah, the CIA's been letting us down. They're not, So this exercise is set up called the Team B exercise. So you have the CIA provides Team A, who are going to provide an analysis of Soviet Union potential capabilities. But Team B is made up by a bunch of people from outside the CIA, a lot of CPDers, and then people like, who's Paul Nitze, who's like, have you ever seen the Woody Allen film Zelig?
Don't think so, no.
So it's the one with this guy who appears everywhere in history called Zelig. So Paul Nitze is kind of like the Zelig of the Cold War.
Right.
He's the guy that is one of the main authors of a document called NSC 68 back in 1950, which provides, that is the bedrock of militarized containment during the Cold War. And Nitze never quite gets to the peak of power. He's never Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. He's things like Secretary of the Navy or a Chief Arms Control negotiator. But Nitze is everywhere, and he's one of the godfathers, really, of like neoconservatism.
Yeah.
So anyway, Nitze is one of the people involved in the Team B exercise, and the Team B people go, "Arg! The Soviet Union has a huge amounts of power. They're terrifying. Oh, you got to like this." And Team B is believed. Retrospectively, with hindsight, we now know that Team A were actually right, and even then, they were still overestimating the Soviet Union. And this is like a Hackett and Co.'s book. It's like a publicly available Team B exercise. It's like, don't believe all this stuff that the Soviets are actually nicey and détente, and they are terrifyingly powerful and all that kind of thing. So it's a public version of all this, this stuff that's been happening. You have these organisations in the UK, like, who are more like domestic focused, like the National Association for Freedom. Did they never realise that the acronym of their name was NAF? I can't. And that's led by an ex-military guy called Colonel John Guriet. And them and people like GB75 with David Stirling from the SAS, these people are all paranoid that an ultra-left-wing government is going to come in, boost the welfare state, and let the Soviets in the door and all that kind of thing. So you have all this... There's an air of... I think the...
well, it's not just isolated to 1978, that is it? Fucking hell. It's not that many years before we saw the BBC putting a giant hat on Jeremy Corbyn in front of a backdrop of the Kremlin. It's only like 6 years ago. I
find it amazing how these kind of anti-Soviet tropes and anti-communist tropes, how... I was actually having a discussion today on Blue Sky about kind of like getting, always not teaching students that the Cold War is just 1947 to 1989, 91. It's like, no, it's before and after. There's all, you see these threads there, and it's fascinating how this stuff, and we'll probably come on to talk about how Hackett has a really long afterlife. After the heyday of it in the late 70s, early 80s. But there's this milieu of, challenging received orthodoxy about how we deal with the Soviet Union, what the power of the Soviet Union is, and especially these things. But we need to spend billions and billions on improving our technology, investing in our conventional forces, all of these kind of things.
Yeah. One of the really intriguing things about Hackett's projections is that, and Hackett and Co., when they look at this is, I think, to some degree, we've been conditioned by films and media and things like that to think that the descent into nuclear war is a panicked control room seeing a blip on a screen, and they have minutes to decide whether to launch a massive all-out counterattack, and then the entire world ends. But what's really interesting about this is it's an incremental escalation through conventional warfare to the use of strategic nukes after that period, and then the resulting collapse of, a big bang when the balloon goes up on the city of Birmingham, and the response is Minsk, and you get this. It's almost like a what was that film called? With Henry Ford, Failsafe, was it? Where I think in Failsafe it's an accidental launch destroys destroys an American
Larry
city.
Hagman, Failsafe, yes.
Yeah, Failsafe. And then they choose a Russian city to target. So you've got this kind of scenario. The Russians fire, I think, an SS-14 at Birmingham, airburst above Birmingham, and then the Allies think, right, we need to proportionately respond, so they nuke Minsk. And then the Soviet Union effectively starts to collapse afterwards, and things kind of slow to a halt. And it did get a lot of criticism for being too optimistic that this might be the scenario, and that it wasn't a mutually assured destruction kind of scenario. Is this too optimistic, or was there really... was it the more likely scenario that this is how this kind of war would unfold? So
there's a couple of sides to this. I think one of the arguments that Hackett and co are making, they were into strengthening conventional defence. That's one of their big things. The trouble is that butts up against reality. There was a lot of planning and thinking within NATO that we can't resist a Warsaw Pact attack across the North German plain without resorting at least to tactical nuclear weapons. We can't. What we're going to do, we're 10 to 1 in terms of tanks. We're going to have like Guards armoured divisions piling through the Fulda Gap. So there was a lot of kind of thinking, well, we're going to need to rely at least on tactical nuclear weapons. And on the Soviet side as well, there were lots of plans made. The most famous one is what's called the 7 days to the Rhine plan, which is you reach the Rhine in a week. And 7 days to the Rhine involved the use of tactical nuclear weapons in order to clear strategic corridors, all that kind of thing. And
so just for people who are listening, what do we mean by the difference between a tactical nuke and a strategic nuke?
So a tactical nuclear weapon is generally, the launching device is much shorter ranged, anything from a couple of miles, wouldn't want to be in that area, to a few hundred miles. So weapons that have battlefield utility. So you'll have a weapon of somewhere between, say, 1 and 50 kilotons, so 1 and 50,000 tons of explosive force, and you would use it against, say, an armoured division. To take out tanks. A strategic weapon, generally we would associate that with the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the big missiles that launch out of silos, or ones that come off submarines, launched by aircraft, etc., etc.
City killers.
Yes, and generally a strategic weapon will be above 100 kilotons, so 100,000 tons of conventional explosive. Anyway, and ones that were deployed during the Cold War ranged anywhere from about 100 kilotons up to, the Soviets had an operational, I'm trying to, off the top of my head, a 10 megaton warhead. The Americans had a 9 megaton operational warhead. They did test bigger ones. But they will kill. They won't just kill cities. They'll just kill entire areas of a country. So the tactical ones are used on the battlefield to take out military units or important, like, tactical targets, like major command centres and that kind of thing. And so there was a lot of consideration for how we use. There were a lot of these weapons in West Germany on the NATO side, like shorter range missiles, Lance Corporal, Honest John. Again, one of the most famous ones is Davy Crockett, the nuclear bazooka. Which is, it's a recoilless rifle. It's not a bazooka. Okay, yeah, fair enough. But it's basically you can you fire this at a tank unit and then run like hell.
Yeah, you don't want to be there, do you? You don't want to be handling one of those.
Britain also had the planning for defending Germany. There was a thing called Blue. Oh, I'm going to get this. There's all these complex code names. The indigo codes, the colour codes. I think it was called Blue Peacock.
Yeah.
And it was a nuclear landmine. And one of the... No. It gets even better than that. And I think it was... I may be getting this wrong. This isn't my area of specialism. And I think it was Blue Peacock. They were like, how do we... These are going to be underground in winter. How do we keep the circuits and the batteries warm enough to, be able to fire the mechanism? How do we can make this work? It needs to be kept warm. How do we do that? We can put warm, but that's going to drain power. How do we do that? Chickens, right? We put live chickens in with a nuclear landmine, and their body heat will keep the landmine warm.
Wow. You know what? I very often think that I ended up in the wrong job. But holy shit, not only did I end up in the wrong job, I ended up in the wrong era, because I want that job where basically I want to be what they were on. I want to be on what they were on when they thought up the nuclear landmine and the chicken solution.
Oh, yeah.
Because those guys, holy shit, I hope they got good annual bonuses for their fucking crazy ideas.
It'll just be a bunch of dudes down at the Atomic Weapons Research establishment taking the piss out of government, going, you think we can get away with a chicken-moderated nuclear landmine? Yeah, why not?
Fucking government gravy train.
Yeah,
let's government gravy train. Bloody civil servants.
Yeah. So there was a sense that in the event of a major war in Europe, nuclear weapons are going to be deployed.
Yeah.
And it's that once escalation starts, how and when can you stop it? That's and often the danger is not that someone in a kind of cinematic sense is just going to be the president and go, fire the nuclear weapons, and that kind of stuff. But because people much lower down the chain of command can have delegated authority, or someone might just accidentally in terror fire a Lance missile with a nuclear warhead without any delegation at all. Boom. Once that first mushroom cloud appears, what do you do?
Yeah. Oh, the chickens escape.
The chickens are toast in this situation. So there's a brilliant scholar in France called Benoit Pelopidas, and he talks about how luck was really important in the Cold War, and not luck in the sense of, you roll a D20, you get a natural 20, oh, that was lucky. He talks about luck in terms of nuclear weapons as a positive outcome in a situation where there is no overall control. And that got us our asses out the fire in so many situations. Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis is not down to Kennedy's leadership or Khrushchev backing down or whatever. It's luck in that sense. So, yeah. I don't know how a war in Europe would have gone, but I do think Hackett is pretty optimistic.
I do sometimes think, with all of this power having existed now for going on 80 years, in terms of truly incendiary capability to destroy enormous parts of the globe, is it luck? Is there some kind of planetary kismet at play? I'm not a religious or particularly spiritual person, but I do sometimes wonder if there is some kind of cosmic force which stops the worst happening until, of course, we get another Tunguska or or some kind of horrific strike that destroyed the dinosaurs comes and sorts us out again. But yeah, it is fascinating to kind of think and dwell on the fact that all of this power existed for all of this time. And when you work in human organisations and government and things like that, because, my day job is in government, and you look around you and you see the weaknesses and flaws of people with a lot of responsibility and people in power, and you think, fortunately, we've got the power of the establishment, and I say, in inverted commas, which kind of stops the worst instincts of the worst examples of these people from engaging in pursuing the wrong decisions, and there's some kind of safety net there. And that's always been quite a comforting thought, I think. And then you just get the political developments in the United States of the last couple of years. You think, oh, well, that doesn't work, does it? That, the checks and balances and everything else. Oh, yeah, it's something which is really, really nice to have some kind of sense of faith in. But even then, we're there have been a few accounts recently of generals or whoever else saying, let's do these briefings with the president out of the room because last week he actually tried to argue for using nuclear weapons in Iran. And it's like, well, even in this scenario where you've got a fucking tool like Hegseth there, even he seems to fortunately be enough of a break on the worst instincts of probably a demented old man. But then you think, well, fingers crossed anyway. Fingers crossed.
I mean, there's a scholar who has been a big influence in my own work called Nina Tannenwald, and she wrote an excellent book about something she called the nuclear taboo in US politics, in that at the most fundamental level, there is this, since 1945, there has been this genuine taboo in the proper sense of the word about the use of nuclear weapons. You can threaten them, you can deploy them, but actually taking that final step, and a lot of this stems from like Harry Truman. An important thing, there was never a decision to drop the atomic bombs. There was multiple layers of decision making and lots of things that fed into each other. Harry Truman did not go, right, that's it, let's wipe out Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's not the way it worked. But there's been a fundamental, since that point, there's been a fundamental sense of we actually cannot use these weapons because these will do something, break society and politics in really important ways, and not just the physical destruction. And I don't, Trump is too dumb to understand that. And the people around him are too dumb to understand that because they don't know what they're dealing with. It's like handing a monkey a Kalashnikov, but I don't want to insult monkeys in this. Let's handing a monkey a Kalashnikov with a loaded magazine and the safety off. So yeah. Anyway, enough about him. Let's not talk about him. Let's talk more about Hackett.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because this whole scenario that Hackett, suggests is, as I say, it does feel close to like the film Failsafe, where you do get this nuclear exchange, and then that the situation sort of recovers itself because there's a long protracted description of how the Warsaw Pact countries, after the destruction of Minsk in response to the destruction of Birmingham, the Soviet machine rattles itself to pieces. Basically. Yeah,
and the Soviet premier is assassinated by a Ukrainian KGB agent, who just walks in and just blows his head off. Yeah.
It's I've got to say the chapter on Birmingham is a doozy, but it's also a really good example of where this book could have done with a little bit of editing. Because you get this wonderful dramatic build-up of the situation at Filingdales, at the listening station on Filingdales Moor. Filingdales Moor, which is somewhere, whenever we used to go to Whitby as kids, would drive past and see the golf balls on the moor. Iconic view, iconic vision for so many people. And you've got this brilliant build-up, and you've got the sense of the nerves of the people, the staff working there, and the communications with contacts down south and the Americans as they realise that actually there is a problem. And it's really fantastic. It's quite cinematic, but then it goes on just for too long.
Yes,
and the drama dissipates. But then it switches to the point of view of the city of Birmingham. And you get the same thing again. You get the threads situation with the descriptions of the airburst over Birmingham, the 50,000 people who die instantly, the people who get burnt but they won't last for long because they'll soon get blown over by the blast, and et cetera, et cetera. Dudley, 7 miles away, is on fire. And it's really good. But again, it goes on too long.
Yeah.
And the drama dissipates. I think they actually do a slightly better job in this with Minsk.
Yes.
In the second book, narratively.
This is, I think, true of the entire book, in that, in the obsession with detail, there is this. It's a really granular book. It goes down right to the. You know exactly how every weapon system works and what its function is and what its role within the wider ecosystem of war is. And it needed an editor. It needed people to just. The book could have been cut in half, and it would still have the same impact. Pretty certain it would have still sold millions of copies. It's just who was it? There was a reviewer at the time. Said went through kind of thing. You hear about Northag and Sanklant and and then he gets there and he goes, and then you end up with Mego, which is my eyes glaze over. Yeah. And that was one of the reviews of the time. We're like, this is just too much. Yeah. There's too much.
Yeah. I think for someone who's quite nerdy about this stuff, it is interesting. But if you just want one of the reviews talks about what a fantastic and terrifying narrative it is, but actually it could have been so much more terrifying and so much more. But the interesting thing, other people have come along and built on this, haven't they? Which we'll maybe talk about a little bit about that. But the Allied response to Minsk is in the follow-up. Yes. The Third World War, The Untold Story. Which is sort of sequel, sort of addendum, sort of parallel expansion. For me, this is to the Third World War as Crab's Moon is to Night of the Crabs. Right. In that it's like there's a certain that it runs parallel. There's more detail. There's narratively it purports to be written 6 months later as a further volume in the first history
with access to Soviet archives.
Yeah. But that was actually released, I think, 4 years later, something like that.
82,
and it takes some account of political developments of the intervening years. And in some ways, I think it's an improvement because there's this fascinating framing device where they have the perspective of a young Red Army officer called Andrei Nekrasov, which adds like a personal dimension to it all, and he reoccurs through the book. But on the other hand, it's nearly twice as fucking long as the first one.
I would contend, I think the Nekrasov bits, that's a good addition. That humanises things in a way that the first book didn't really do. The section on Minsk, I think the fact that there was an extended chapter devoted to Birmingham, and then the destruction of Minsk got one paragraph in the original book, is a bit kind of like, so the people of Minsk don't count? Anyway, so maybe they spent way too long on the Birmingham thing going into... Third World War, The Untold Story, is even more boring than the original because it ladles on so much more detail that you just don't need. It was a blatant attempt to capture lightning in a bottle again and make even more money because that book had sold a lot. It was in the New York Times top 10 bestseller list. It was hugely popular amongst Hackett got letters from US military personnel writing to him about how much they liked the book. And critical reviews aside, hugely popular. This was nowhere near it. Yeah. Because it's the same ground being gone over again. I mean, yes, it expands the kind of the view. There's a lot more in the global situation. Yeah. Yes. And it updates things like, so the Shah is gone from Iran now. So, but it's... I found it... When going through this again, I found this such hard going.
Confession, I never got through it.
Oh!
I never got through it. I ran out of... chutzpah and whatever else and energy to actually complete it.
It saps the will.
It does.
It really does sap the will.
But I think part of the problem with that was reading them back to back.
Yeah, that's a...
Had I had a break, then I might have actually managed it. But something else happened as well, which I'll get to in a moment, which actually distracted me from it. But I read that some editions of The Third World War, The Untold Story, have an alternate ending. Right. Now, what I read on Wikipedia was that the British editions have it. The American Macmillan edition doesn't. But I don't think this has this alternate ending, because it's described as one where grubby peaceniks won out and the West didn't keep pace with the USSR in nuclear weapon deployment, and it leads to a Warsaw Pact-dominated Europe, a defeated USA retreating back home, and Britain leaving the EEC and being controlled by a joint British-Soviet commission, and the poor British Army, Air Force and Navy escaping to live again under USA, Canadian or Australian command. Bloody hippies. But that said, my UK edition doesn't seem to have that, so I'm not sure where that information comes from or what it's referring to.
So I would go to, I think one of the best pieces of analysis of this book is the American historian Adam Sipe, who's at Texas A&M University, and he wrote an article called "It's Visionary Battle Scenes," which appeared in the Journal of Military History, and it's about, Sipe's work is great. I really admire his stuff that he's done about. He also wrote a great article about the Fulda Gap war game from 1977 and its impact in Germany. Brilliant stuff. Anyway, and I didn't see any mention of that in Sipe. I mean, I know there was like a German edition of it, which was, I think, Der Dritte Weltkrieg, Hauptschauplatz Deutschland, which is Third World War main theatre Germany.
Yeah.
And I know that there was an alternative ending in Hackett's first original draft.
Okay. That makes sense.
So Hackett wrote essentially, which was the original draft was apparently, his original 30,000 word treatment, which would be expanded by his various contributors, that he passed to this American Colonel Dupuy, and Dupuy came back with a lot of stuff that influenced.
Right, okay.
Hackett made radical changes to the story of the war.
Yeah.
Based on what he had been told by Dupuy and other commentators that had a look at this original treatment. So I wonder if there is maybe a bit of confusion there. I've only got the UK edition of it. I don't have any other editions of it.
Well, when I read this, I was really confused because,
I
had no memory of that whatsoever, and I checked and double checked, but it's not there. So
But it came out in multiple. It came out in Germany, and one of the things it did in Germany actually. So this is really. It led to a quite successful book in Germany called Ende, a diary of the Third World War, which was published in 1983. And it was published in English in 1985 by Anton Andreas Guha. And it is a diary of someone's experiences in the Third World War in Europe.
Right.
And it's almost a response to Hackett.
Yeah.
It is about a fifth of the length and is way more readable and is way more compelling than Hackett's work, and that came out in English as well in 85, and actually it was quite a success. But it was kind of a response to the publication of Hackett's book in Germany.
Oh, I'll have to look out for that then.
It's good. It's an interesting piece of work. I like it.
Yeah, the reason why I didn't carry on reading the Third World War: The Untold Story is because Posty delivered another book that I had as a teenager, The Illustrated History of World War III. Yeah, by someone who I suspect you'll be very much aware of, John Bradley.
John Bradley, yep.
Because he worked up at the University of Manchester for a long time, didn't he?
I think he did, yeah.
That's where you work,
yeah.
isn't it?
No, I'm at Liverpool John Moores.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, no, but I'm aware of him. He wrote on World War II and all sorts of stuff as well.
He wrote The Illustrated History of the Third Reich.
Yes, that's it. That's what I'm thinking of,
and
yes.
a lot of stuff about Czechoslovakia. Yes. Another absolutely fascinating fucking bloke. So The Illustrated History of World War III, one of those huge dust-jacketed hardcovers that you got in the 80s. So, I've left it downstairs so I can't show you it, but loads of imagery, loads of full-page photographs. Probably, in some ways, less satisfying to read than the Hackett books, but jam-packed with awesome pictures of hardware and a lot quicker to read. But what's more interesting in the book, I think, is Bradley himself, because he wrote tons of stuff, including that Illustrated History of the Third Reich I had, and he was a specialist on Czech politics and history, because he was a Czech national born as Jan Nežes, but after being sent to work in uranium mines as a teenager, escaped communist Czechoslovakia, came to Britain, became a steel worker in the north, changed his name to John Bradley to avoid Czech secret services, then, after going to Polytechnic in Kentish Town, went to Cambridge, became a successful academic, worked at Manchester University from 63 to 81, and then later, after the fall of communism, went home and died only a couple of years ago at the ripe old age of 93.
Yeah.
And in his obituary in The Guardian, it suggests he was also even recruited by MI5 for a brief period, but he wouldn't play ball with the dark arts, so they dropped him. What a guy.
Yeah.
What an absolute fucking guy.
Yeah.
So that's why I got distracted from carrying on reading The Untold Story, because that arrived and I was like, right, let's get a cushion to balance this on because it's fucking enormous. Get my readers on and ploughed through that instead. But yeah, and you can pick up for like £4 from World of Books. You know, dirt cheap. Absolutely dirt cheap and well worth having. But I can understand why I got rid of all these books because they're enormous and I never probably would have got round to reading them again and listening to a podcast on them.
I mean, I love these kind of like big illustrated kind of like, books from this era. Like the one that sticks in my mind is the Nuclear War Atlas by William Bunge. I can never remember, get his surname right. And it's like full of these maps of what's going to happen in a nuclear war.
I used to love these oversized books. There's another one I got from eBay a while back that I had at school, and I lent it to someone and they never gave me it back. So, The Tourist's Guide to Transylvania.
Oh, brilliant.
Which is really just an excuse to reproduce in full colour loads of absolutely fantastic paperback covers from back in the day.
Oh yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely. So loads of Les Edwards, loads of other authors of the time, just terrific stuff. And that's, that illustrated history of the Third World War just went beautifully on the shelf.
On that with that. Did you ever have Space Wreck?
Was that one of the Terran Trade Authority books?
Yes.
Now, I never had any. For some reason, they would have been right up my street, but for some reason, I just never came across them.
Still got my copy upstairs.
But my mate Ian, who has been on this podcast and who is a friend of the show and a friend of ours who we meet up with regularly, who will be at Rolling in the Ruins on the 20th, running a Hawkmoon game, he sent me one of the Terran Trade Authority books because he found it in a cheap bookshop in Carnforth. So I finally do have a copy of one of the Terran Trade Authority books. But there was the same thing, weren't there? They were an excuse to license and print on huge glossy pages.
Yeah.
Terrific sci-fi art by people like Chris Foss and all sorts of other people. Absolutely terrific. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful books. But you know what? We've talked about that. We've talked about Hackett. Now, those books went on to influence a hell of a lot of things, didn't they? Because I read that even Max Brooks said that World War Z was influenced by Hackett's Third World War books and the style in which they were written. And I think I messaged you a while ago. I picked up that novel Team Yankee.
Yeah, Team Yankee, yeah.
Which is set within the Hackett continuity. Yeah. So they've had a pretty massive impact, these books, right?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I'm going with Adam Sipes' work in here. I mean, he makes a very good argument, and others have kind of commented on this, that Hackett essentially gives birth to the modern techno-thriller genre that emerges from this late Cold War period. And it's, the fixation with the minutiae of military technology, the detail, the contemporary resonance, all of these kind of things. Most obviously, Tom Clancy, Red Storm Rising. You look at Red Storm Rising and it's like, Clancy clearly read World War III when he was doing Red Storm Rising. And then Team Yankee comes along. You can also see it in the work of Jerry Ahern. I shudder whenever I say his name, in the survivalist books, because they have that same kind of thing of hang on, just give me one moment, I'm going to get the first survivalist book off the shelf. And
with his dual chrome detonics.
Yes, that's exactly it. And
detonics 45s. The amount of times he says dual detonic 45s in the space of that first book
is
I looked it up. He actually had a stake in detonics.
Did he?
He did, yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he did.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I just love it. On the very first page, this is exactly, from 1981?
Yeah.
Small H&K MP5 SD3 integral silencer, collapsible stock 9mm submachine guns grasped in their white-knuckled fist.
Yeah.
Just say submachine gun, dude.
It's absolutely ludicrous, isn't it?
Kind of like, Rourke fired the Heckler & Koch P2A1 flare pistol clenched in his right hand. It's 26.5mm projectile, blah, blah, yada, 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 yada. And I think, but that kind of stuff that's what's in Hackett, him and his collaborators, I mean, theirs is a kind of world of creative non-fiction.
Yeah.
Kind of. But yeah, they go on to the entire techno-thriller genre. People read this book and go, oh, wow, I can do that. Even Jerry Ahern.
There was such a market for it, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Not just amongst, intellectuals and people who were like maybe academically interested in that stuff, but just gun nerds and tank nerds and to be honest, as a teenager, I was a gun and tank nerd, just like a lot of kids were. I had copies of Jane's manuals in my bedroom.
Yeah. I'm going to lean over and get another book down. It's a shame this isn't video because nobody can see any of this. But I when I was a kid, Hackett at the same time as the Salamander book, An Illustrated Guide to Future Fighters.
Nice!
And Combat Aircraft. Bill Gunston evaluates the most exciting military aircraft designs planned for the next decade. Diagrams, charts, and dramatic colour photographs illustrate over 50 aircraft plans. And this was from 1984.
Yeah, there was another series of those huge books that were like Jane's manuals for people who just shopped in the high street, and there was land forces of the 20th century, air forces of the 20th century, and naval forces of the 20th century, and I had all of those as well. Yeah. And there was an artist, I have no idea who this artist was, but he did imagery of jet planes and things like phantom jets. And his artwork was fucking gorgeous. It was brilliant, just like profile and front on artwork of all of this hardware. And yeah, I've got to say, as a kid, I did kind of love all that
what's
stuff.
Astounding in this Future Fighters book, it uses a lot of like concept design work from companies like Grumman and Rockwell, and some of the artwork is incredible. They got genuinely really good artists to do these amazingly dynamic, pictures of planes that were never going to. Nobody was ever going to build them. Yeah. But it's that kind of these little salamander books of future fighters and Soviet combat forces and all that kind of thing. That was totally in the atmosphere. But I mean, the thing is, aside from the techno thriller thing, there was a whole bunch of other stuff about people writing books about World War III. You know what I'm going to mention now? One of my favourites, and I understand it's one of your favourites too now, World War III and the Destiny of America by Charles R. Taylor.
That's on our sofa downstairs, and I still haven't got round to reading it.
It is. All you need is the back.
Yeah.
What does the Bible say about America's future? Now, I'm not having a go at Christian faith. Yeah. I'm having a go at Charles R. Taylor, right? What does the Bible say about America's future? Some people feel the interpretation of biblical prophecy depends heavily on speculation. By contrast, this book correlates hundreds of biblical texts, all cross-referenced for further study, with quotations from documented news sources. It's filled with historical, geographical, and scientific information to support its convictions. And it's basically said the Bible predicts a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. It keeps, he does a classic thing of a word that looks like another word. They mean the same thing. I can't remember what he calls Moscow keeps getting predicted in the Bible because of Meshach or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you think Hackett is boring, this is incredible because it is excruciatingly the Bible predicted the Soviet backfire bomber. Now that was news to me, but apparently Ezekiel, famed for a lot of things, Ezekiel kind of looked into the future and went, Tupolev Tu-22M backfire. Yeah. Yep. Write it down in the Book of Ezekiel. So so you get these kind of religious interpretations of World War III as well, which are fascinating, although stultifyingly dull to read.
Yeah, I'm going to give that a go at some point, but you know what? That might end up on the pile of books that I send to a lucky patron. So someone's going to get some Hackett and some Charles R. Stewart.
I think you're probably going to be handing Taylor to someone else. I'm just going to
I'm definitely going to give it a look.
Put that
I'm
out
definitely
there.
going to give it a
Put
look.
that out there.
But yeah, so there was so much of this stuff, wasn't there? There was a whole series of TV movies and all sorts of other stuff that seemed to definitely kind of take some of this, like By Dawn's Early Light, I think it was, with James L. Jones and Powers Booth and Rebecca De Mornay. Yeah, which was a big favourite of mine at the time.
Yeah.
I'd taped that off telly.
Rebecca De Mornay ends up blind in the bomber after seeing the blast of the nuclear weapon.
Yeah. Terrific TV movie, really good. I think you can actually watch that on YouTube now.
Yeah.
But there was one I distinctly remember from the 80s when this obsession with World War III started to emerge in things like TV movies. And it was called World War III, and it starred David Soul. And have you seen it?
Yes, yeah.
It's absolutely fantastic. And I got the novel. The
there's a novelization of it. Brilliant.
Published by New English Library.
Of course it was. Of course it was New English Library.
And it's pretty much beat for beat the same as the film, but because it's a novel, they can have a little bit more pizzazz in terms of the scale of the events.
Yeah.
But that blew me away when I was a kid. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. So I managed to get it on DVD because I got the NEL novelisation of it and read it and thought, that was really good. And I remember a lot of this stuff from watching it. So I got the DVD and I watched it with Phil. And it still stands up, that TV movie. It's extraordinarily good. Yeah. And the punch of the ending is pretty fantastic. Because the ending, basically, it's the same as the ending from the Bedford incident, really. You've got this build-up. It's like, will it happen? Won't it happen? And then it's just white out and you know that World War III has started. Yeah. Really, really good film.
The one that kind of that I always kind of think about from this period is Miracle Mile.
Love Miracle Mile.
Miracle Mile is I think it's a genuinely great film. It's a under-acknowledged classic of the kind of nuclear paranoia and nuclear fear of the 1980s.
Yeah, Arrow did a terrific Blu-ray of it a few years ago.
Oh, did they? I've only ever seen it on DVD.
Yeah, well worth picking up. Yeah, and I actually rewatched the Bedford incident. I can't remember where we were. We were in a hotel somewhere, and I put TV on in the morning. The Bedford incident was on, and we were supposed to be going out for lunch or something like that, and I wouldn't leave until we finished the Bedford incident. What a film that is. Absolutely terrific film. So we've been going quite a while now. We've talked about Hackett, but we do need to talk a little bit about your analysis of Twilight 2000. I mentioned Twilight 2000 earlier on, and in it, you point out that at the very height of World War III paranoia and that domination of the cultural zeitgeist, up pops the role-playing game, Twilight 2000.
Yeah.
And it did position itself pretty successfully as a unique experience, I think, at the time, because it has this kind of dedication to some level of realism, inverted commas, question mark, which is, probably, what do we mean by that? When Twilight 2000 came out, it had this big claim of realism. But you make a lot of points in your article because mechanically it's very much of its time. More playable than Aftermath or the Morrow Project or any of those things. Or any of the other World War III or post-nuke apocalyptic themed games. But it's the verisimilitude, the fact that it projects fairly well a road to war and feels fairly close to our real world, just turned upside down in a way that we all as teenagers expected to happen any minute. So it had a resonance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, connecting it to Hackett, so I think there's a great quote from the end of, and this kind of bridges from Hackett into Twilight 2000, I think, so there is a point. There's a great piece from the end of Adam Sipes' article, when he says, Third World War was not just a novel full of technical and operational detail, it was a call to action, a provocation, a warning, and a vision of what war might look like. While the author, his collaborators, and the companies that published the book emphasised its gritty details and verisimilitude, the effect seems to have been different. The novel functioned as a blank canvas that let readers grapple with war and warfare in their own national and local contexts. They could read into Hackett's plot their hopes and fears and could use the book to better understand the Cold War as it moved into a dangerous new phase. The book's success and its legacy are rooted in the willingness of readers all over the world to place themselves, their families, and their communities into a story as protagonists, bystanders, or victims. John Hackett's Third World War, a titanic struggle between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, never came. While we know this today, his readers did not. In Hackett's prose, a global audience could confront the dark possibilities of a world at war. Now, I think that's a brilliant summation of how Hackett's book was received. It's not so much about was he making accurate predictions, it was how the audience could project their fears and understandings onto it. And that bridges very neatly into Twilight 2000 because it also tried to achieve this kind of verisimilitude of a realistic Third World War that may emerge at some point in the near future, and then allow people to actually deal with that war, place themselves in that situation, and bridge between the dangerous present and the even more dangerous future by playing that game. And Twilight 2000 is a fascinating one. I mean, Chadwick, Wiseman, etc., who designed it, Hackett's book is a clear and obvious influence.
Yeah,
it's it is there. It is Hackett brought to the gaming table. One of the fascinating things about it, I always find, is that Frank Chadwick, certainly his initial intention wasn't to do a post-apocalyptic game. He wanted to make a successful military role-playing game. But you're always hamstrung in a military role-playing game is you have to take orders.
Yeah,
you're a private. And the sergeant says, go do this. As your character, you're like, okay, I'm having an argument with the sergeant. The sergeant shoots you. Okay, so how do we get away from the strictures of command, and how do we not have the shadow of Vietnam in it? Let's set it in the year 2000, after a NATO Warsaw Pact war a la Hackett. You're on your own, you've been set free from the strictures of command, you are now at liberty. You are soldiers, you have the equipment of soldiers and the training of soldiers, but you're now at liberty to do what you want. And it just gives you this sandbox to go and play in. And sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, please, carry on.
Well, I think in terms of the settings and the expectations laid out, certainly in the first edition, this idea, it's like, right, it's our last push. The Third World War, it's a terrible shithole. Everybody's got rads. The last push has collapsed. You're on your own in the middle of an irradiated Polish wasteland. It lays out certain expectations, right? But in delivery, it's pretty mild. It's a soldiery game with the, as you say, with the restraints released. It's an adventure game.
Yeah,
it's an adventure game with military trappings.
Yeah,
right. We loved it. Don't get me wrong. We loved it at the time.
Yep.
But you quote Marcus Rowland in the paper, who said the moral stance and attitudes it exemplifies are fairly loathsome. And the setting had evidently been designed to avoid showing the worst effects of the bomb. The random encounters don't include civilians suffering from radiation burns, blind children, and the hideously dead and dying victims of blast and heat, which I think is fair enough and pretty on the money. But on the other hand, if you want to have a fun time, if you actually want to enjoy yourself.
Yeah, Rowland didn't like Twilight 2000.
No.
So in many ways, and I've written about this, I agree with Marcus Rowland. Twilight 2000 does kind of like Hackett and co. It takes steps towards the brink and just sticks its toe just over the brink. So there is a nuclear war, and it's a much bigger nuclear war than Hackett portrays.
Yeah,
but it's not the planet-destroying global. And I think one of the there's a line from I think it was the Howling Wilderness supplement, which is about the United States, that says the nuclear war it didn't destroy humanity, it just destroyed civilization.
Yeah,
and I do think there's an interesting thing here in the way in which Twilight 2000 replicates some of the sanitized thinking about nuclear war. I think Rowland is perhaps unconsciously, a very clever man, don't get me wrong. I think he's been around in the British game scene for a huge amount, made vast contributions to it.
Oh, super bright guy as well. He's forgotten the future stuff and all that stuff. He's fantastic.
And he's done so much in the British game. It's incredible. But I do think he is onto something there, because Twilight 2000, and it's certainly the first edition, it does sanitize nuclear war. And that kind of links to, there's a brilliant scholar called Carol Cohn, who wrote stuff about American defense intellectuals and the way they think about nuclear war back in the 80s and the early 90s. She's still working in academia, an amazing scholar. And she talks about how these men thought in these sanitized abstractions of nuclear war, that they were devoid of the human bodies, of suffering, of all of these kind of things, which are coded as unmasculine. If you acknowledge suffering, it's not a masculine thing. And I think Twilight 2000 unconsciously does that as well. It takes the horror of nuclear war and sanitizes it in so many different ways. One of the things I find fascinating, and I'm sure this is just a mistake, right? This is an editing error. In Howling Wilderness, they give you a map of all the nuclear target locations in the US. None of them are named.
Right.
It doesn't even tell you what, and unless you know that's Wyoming. And then there's a list on the next page of where all these nuclear targets are, but the two don't link. There's no numbers to link them. It's literally just an outline map of the US with dots on it and a list of places. So unless you know where Grand Rapids is or Kirtland Air Force Base is, the two things are complete. So you have this map of nuclear targets. There's just this blank space.
Yeah. First edition Twilight 2000, just on maps alone, is two extremes. You either get really, really detailed maps that look like they could be Ordnance Survey maps, or you get hastily sketched. We'll talk about some of them shortly when we get to the Survivor's Guide to the United Kingdom.
Yay!
Yeah. But yeah, yes. The thing is, I think he is on the money, but expectations of players must vary, I suppose. And is it possible that American players may have expected a more survivalist take on Tour of Duty TV series? Tour of Duty via The Survivalist. They all wanted to be in Poland with dual chrome-plated Detonics 45s. You know, they wanted to pour through equipment lists because, let's face it, the Twilight 2000 supplements, first and second edition, were basically hardware porn, weren't they? Really.
Infantry weapons guide, heavy weapons guide, Soviet vehicle guide, NATO vehicle guide, blah, blah. So one of the fascinating things that's come out of interviewing a lot of people for this project for the book is the different ways that people on both sides of the Atlantic approached Twilight 2000 and games like that. So you had people who were like, who've gone, we were teenagers and like driving around Poland in a tank shooting shit up. Great. That's exactly the kind of game we want to play.
Yeah.
And fair enough, that's exactly what we did when I was a teenager. But then you also get people kind of going like, well, actually, no, we kind of went, we want to do stuff about restarting civilization, about protecting people, about building communities and all that. And that's not in the rules.
Yeah.
That's not in the game. But so you have these kind of people do kind of take the twin-wielded 45s approach, just like yeehaw, murder hobo kind of thing. But then you also get people who take a quite different approach to it, one that is not covered by the rules.
Yeah.
So,
I think if I were to play it these days, a while back, our pal Clarkey ran a post-apocalyptic game set on Tenerife, and he kept accounts, or he ran this for several different groups over a period of time, set on different parts of Tenerife. And you had one part of Tenerife where the characters were ex-British Army snipers and things like that. Whereas our group mine was a retired stand-up comedian from Bolton. Someone else. Long story short, our overall plan was to start a petting zoo and a cheese factory to try and restore, number one, entertainment, and number two, nice cheese to the people of Tenerife. And that's very, very different to how I would play a game when I was a teenager. I'll tell you at some point about how we played Twilight 2000. But the idea that it was an adventure game with the military trappings set in a theme park version of a Third World War or a lightweight TV series version of a Third World War. Even GDW leaned into that after a while, because if you look at the cover of the second edition, the art by Del Harris, it's very A-Team. You've got the handsome bandanaed Michael Dudikoff guy in the foreground. You've got the wacky howling Mad Murdoch type behind him. You've got, he's flanked by a black guy whose shirt buttons appear to have exploded at some point in the past. And a hot
blown off in the nuclear blast.
Yeah, and maybe a hot, like, you know, Eastern European babe with an Uzi. But, you know, American listeners, let us know what frames of reference might have informed you as teenage Twilight 2000 players in the 80s, because I was involved in a long-running first edition game back in the day, run by an old buddy who, funnily enough, went on to be a fairly high-profile mountaineer with, like, a sort of, you know, a fairly high-profile... Anyway, but I ran a game of 2.2 later that ran for a couple of months until folks went off to university. Then I ran a much longer Merc 2000 game, which was the alternate setting, that built over the course of a year to the nuking of Birmingham. So obviously that Hackett influence was there in my brain when I was running that campaign. But it then went on hiatus. But our frames of reference really were Threads, Hamburger Hill, and Sven Hassel, because in Jeff's first edition game, which I played, we were part of a Soviet penal regiment, barely surviving, and spent most of our time stripping American corpses of equipment and gold teeth before meeting a fiery demise when Jeff just couldn't be asked to carry on GMing it, because he probably got fed up with how we were all behaving. And in my games, I couldn't resist bringing less realistic elements in to keep it more interesting and mysterious for my players, because none of my players wanted to play Twilight 2000 because they weren't in the slightest bit interested in the setting or the idea of the game. So I had to keep it, you know, they didn't have a Jane's manual in their bedroom. You know, they were listening to bloody REM and stuff like that. But the love, the melange I came up with right until I finally tipped it over into proper Twilight 2000 with the nuking of Birmingham. And then later, after some of the players moved on, the rest of us picked it up again. And I really leaned into the abject misery of how I saw that setting should be, with cannibalism and, you know, really, really awful human behaviour. And it just wasn't any fun at all. It was miserable and depressing. And it was more like playing the road than it was Pirates of the Vistula.
That was like when it was mainly my friend Scott, who ran the game, who liked, you know, he was interested in guns and tanks and all the kind of fight, you know. So he was the main GM for Twilight 2000, and you know, we never really ran out of ammunition. It was all good, and I ran it once for a brief campaign, and I think within the first hour, everyone got radiation sickness and was, you know, kind of, it was like miserable, just this kind of like relentless Threads level. But one of the fascinating things is, I think Threads is a more significant influence on American gamers who played Twilight 2000 in this period than a lot of people would think, because it was screened by PBS. It was quite well known. A lot of people I've interviewed talk about, they say, oh yeah, the day after was the first one we saw, but then we saw Threads, and that kind of blew the day after out the water. So I think Threads was an influence for gamers on both sides of the Atlantic as well, which is, you know, it's interesting that kind of like the way that the film goes that way and Twilight 2000 comes that way and everything, and then these kind of, everything kind of collides together. But yeah, sorry.
I think pursuit of realism in games is something I left behind a long time ago, because, you know, I understand why people might want it, and it's like simulationist systems as well. I just don't have the will, because I mean, if you read the first edition player's manual, some of the fucking maths you have to do just to work out your character's stats.
I can't
is
reach
ludicrous.
I can't reach it just now, but I've got my copy of first edition Phoenix Command.
Just
on the shelf up there.
One thing in its defence is not Phoenix Command. And if you really wanted that extra crunch, you could always get Kevin Dockery's Edge of the Sword Volume 1.
Yes.
Which was multi-statted for games, and I think it included Twilight 2000.
Or if you really wanted to like go a bit more freewheeling, Blacksburg Tactical Research Centre's 3G system.
Oh, I don't think I've come across that.
3G was for guns. It was a weapon design system.
Yeah.
You designed weapons realistically for different tech levels.
Yeah.
And then you could port them into the system of your choice.
Yeah, I actually went on eBay and I got Kevin Dockery's Edge of the Sword Volume 1 again a few years ago, because I had it as a teenager into my early 20s, and I got rid of it. And I was on eBay, I was thinking, I'd been talking to someone about it, I said, I've got to get hold of this. Yeah. And I'd forgotten the black and white picture of him in the front, and it's like a guy with shooting glasses, a bit of a pot belly and a black t-shirt, holding an M79 grenade launcher, trying to look as serious as possible. It's wonderful.
what I kind of look back on, and I'm not wanting to take the piss out of people who are still around and still contributing to like popular culture and games and everything. But there's so many instances of unintentional Garth Marenghi from that era. The very serious kind of, you know, poses of like the designer photographs and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. One of the most baffling things about Phoenix Command is that system was used for a very, very short series of spin-off licensed RPGs.
Oh, I ran the Aliens adventure game.
Yeah. Did you know that as well as the Aliens adventure game...
You're going to mention Lawnmower Man.
I've got it. I got it off eBay. Yeah, I got it off eBay. Yeah, I got it off eBay. Yeah.
The most utterly pointless role-playing game of all time.
But they also did a Bram Stoker's Dracula
one. Yeah.
It's like, what the how the fuck are you going to crowbar that into the leading edge system?
Even though Aliens the Adventure game was a simplified version of Phoenix Command, it still took us, I think the one time we played it, it took us about 4 hours to run a 3-second combat.
Yeah. There were elements of the setting I quite liked in that, you know, and I think some of them they've actually picked up and put in the Free League game, like the Harvesters. But here we go. So, let's see if you can see him.
There we are.
Kevin Dockery.
Excellent.
There he is.
There we go.
Edge of the Sword Volume 1. There was never a Volume 2.
No. Yeah. The one, and this links back into post-apocalypticism, good segue. The one leading edge game I actually have a lot of time for is Living Steel.
Never had a copy or seen it. No.
I'll bring it along to Rolling in the Ruins. I've got everything for it. Science fiction, post-apocalyptic, actually quite an interesting game. Quite an interesting game.
Going back to Hackett and Twilight 2000, they must have. You said they must have read Hackett because those like timelines to the war. I always really, really love the dispassionately noted events that build the sense of doom before the critical events that spark the conflagration. When I see stuff in the news, sometimes I think of it in terms of a paragraph from one of those things. So it's like, April 2026, United Arab Emirates leave OPEC. You know, it's like, oh no, we're on the build. Yeah. But famously, because the GDW designers behind Twilight 2000 were wargamers, weren't they? And they'd play these events out. Yeah. Which that he also did that to develop the Traveller 2300 setting. They were old school war games, so the system, the system may not be as bad as Phoenix Command. It still is a little bit crunchy, but even GDW themselves overhauled it for the second edition. And a while back, so I got, when I was like everybody else, I got rid of most of my role playing games 8 years ago. Then I started rebuying them all, and I got the second edition Twilight 2000 box, the 2.2 version.
Oh yeah,
and I got it out, and I thought I'm going to have a read of this because, of course, the first edition there's barely 70 pages of rules, whereas the Twilight 2000 2.2, second edition 2.2, they're like over 200-page rule books. And all I thought was, how the fuck did I run a game with these rules for over a year? Just how on earth could my brain cope with it? It's because I had a younger brain and I could cope with maths better, probably. But this extrapolation of World War III taking place in the late 90s and largely missing the collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, the great thing about role-playing games is you always get a second edition. So you get the second edition where they take account of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then edition 2.2 furthers those developments, and then finally just decides to shift to an alternate history setting so as not to continually fall victim to real events. And they have that lovely moment where they say, right, okay, so the Moscow August coup of 1991 is successful, Yeltsin is assassinated, the Soviet Union continues to exist, therefore we can have a Twilight War. Great, happy days. Did you look at Twilight 2013?
Yes, I've had a glance through the PDF of it. It's so Twilight 2013 and second edition, because they're kind of like post-Cold War kind of stuff. They're going to be in the final chapter of the book I'm writing, so I've not actually got around to looking at them properly yet.
Yeah, I think 2013 effectively Twilight 2000 third edition. Under license. It got a lot of negative reviews for handling that timeline to war badly. And its worst crime for me was stretching the Road to War section to almost 40, 50 pages. And it just gets boring. Yeah. And there's a lot of war on terror. It's war on terror-tastic. Because of course it is, because, you know, it's written in 2007 or 8 or whatever. And as usual, anything about the UK is shonky as fuck. But it's not alone in that. because
No.
I also picked up off eBay a while ago The Survivor's Guide
To the UK.
to the United Kingdom.
The
which
last
is
supplement for first edition Twilight 2000.
Deservedly the last. If this killed the line, I'm not surprised. I mean, I'm sure they were thinking about second edition anyway. But to a British person reading this, I imagine this is how those kids who went to Willy Wonka's chocolate experience in Glasgow felt a couple of years ago. Because, okay, there's no AI. That's maybe a bit harsh because it predates AI. But the author gets it so wrong on so many levels about the UK that it is like looking at an AI picture of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Wonderland in terms of as how accurate it is. Rather amusing, you know. I came across a rebuttal to your paper by an American wargamer, an RPG guy. And this is relevant because this is an American's view of World War III in the UK. But anyway, this guy, he made some fairly reasonable points in his responses to some of your points, but it was a bit like an old RPG forum flame war, where he would copy and paste an extract from your paper and then write a response 4 times as long, and then copy.
The thing is, you can't have a flame war without decontextualization. It's the core part of it.
So he's written it like a flame war, and some of his points, to be fair, are reasonable positions to take. But by the end, he so totally shits the bed because he says he feels sorry for you. You're probably a really bad gamer, and I quote, a person without hope.
Okay then.
Absolutely amazing.
I don't go looking for commentary on the stuff that I write, so you need to send me a link to that.
Oh, no, you know what? Maybe I will, maybe I won't, because I probably will.
You're going to save me a lot of time trying to find it.
Well, it's from a website called Armchair Dragoons. Right.
Actually, no, I don't want the link. No, I don't want the link.
But it's a guy who takes a very American position in that he, not just an American position, but a very gamer, old school, probably 55-year-old bloke gamer position, in that he's personally offended by all of the points that you make.
Does he understand? You can probably tell me. Does he get that I'm writing a work of historical analysis? I'm not having a go at his favourite game.
No.
It's a game I loved, Twilight 2000, as a kid.
But we had something very similar. When we did our first RPG episode, Loz and I made some, I thought, fairly good-natured and humorous pokes at Stormbringer, the role-playing game. And we had 2 comments that were miles long and that they took personal offence at the fact that we were criticising a game that they'd been playing for 30 years. And it was, it was funny, but on the other hand, I thought, my God, you know, it's so easy to offend some people. And sometimes, I was reflecting on myself thinking, were we unfair in this? And I thought, no, this guy's just like an overly sensitive mook, you know? And he's probably having flame wars with 1 million people a day and, comment about various things. But it is an interesting read, actually, because the guy does have a position on some of these things. And some of it is like, well, how dare you say that it's written from a masculine perspective because there's a woman on the cover, that kind of thing.
I do address that question in the actual article itself.
Yeah, it's definitely the case where even the bits that he copies and pastes, had he just copied and pasted the subsequent 2 paragraphs, it would have answered his own question. So, But then he wouldn't have been able to flame for 4 paragraphs, would he? So,
it's great that people are reading it.
Yeah.
But
your points about the game being America-centric and coded as very masculine really come to the fore in this supplement. And there are some of the worst examples of gaming supplements I've ever come across of the American view of the UK variety of gaming supplements. Some of them are really fucking terrible. And blimey, this is a prime example. And it's got bad maps as well. Going back to this. So the geographical awareness of the UK in this supplement is really something to behold. The best example, the book's first map positions York just west of Flamborough Head, and it has it as the most northerly city south of Edinburgh. There is nothing between York and Edinburgh.
But it was the nuclear blast shoved it.
Yeah. And then the probably the best bit, or the best map, is the second map on page 15, where you've got the location of forces. So one of the funniest things about this book is one of the main factions.
I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say.
The Red Devils. The Man United football fan hooligan chapter. And even when it gets to the point where it outlines the Red Devils and their order of battle. And the equipment that they have is just fucking stupid. But the brilliant thing about the map is, where it shows you where the Red Devils are, it's probably round about Hexham in Northumberland. So round about Hexham in Northumberland, you've got Hadrian's army, Red Devils, the Scottish Union faction, and the Chainmail Warriors. Just a bit Mad Max. And then you think, right, so what is around Manchester if the Red Devils are up around Hexham? Well, down there you've got Baby Squad, the New Order, the Sherwood Rangers, who are nowhere near Nottingham, I should point out, Gilmore's Gladiators, there's a couple of others, but my personal favourite, Dave Hughes Marauders, which is just fucking brilliant. It's genuinely terrible, lazy garbage.
You've not mentioned my favourite one. What are they called? The Grampian Rangers or something like that?
Yeah, what we got.
They're about 300 miles south of the Grampians?
Yeah, you've got, right up north, near Inverness, you've got the SNP.
SNP brackets provisional wing.
Yeah, John Campbell's Wildcats and the Highland Warriors.
Yeah,
and then round about Edinburgh, you've got round about Edinburgh, you've got the Royal Army of Scotland, the Celt Rangers, and the New Jacobites. In Wales,
sorry, have to stop you there. Yeah. I love the fact the Celt Rangers.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously.
Yeah. It's absolutely incredible. In Wales, you've just got the Welsh Voluntary National Army, because Wales is pretty stable. In the southeast of England, pretty much the southeast, East Anglia, the Midlands, you've got the British Army. And then down in Cornwall and Dorset, you've got the Duchy of Cornwall, the Soviet group of forces England, the Cornwall Liberation Front, the Pirates of Penzance...
Sorry.
Yeah, and Braze Bandits.
Yep.
But it's all terrible, lazy garbage. But if we were to analyse the Red Devils further and the fact that they're in Hexham, if any of the big football team followings or fan groups from the major cities that got nuked were to survive to be a powerful faction in World War III Britain, it probably would be most likely be the Man United fan club, because most Man United fans aren't actually from Manchester.
Oh.
So they wouldn't have got nuked, would they? But on the other hand, all these middle-class Man United fans from Chester and Matlock and Hebden Bridge and who knows, maybe even Hexham, would hardly be hardcore enough either to be legitimately effective post-nuke marauders, would they? So it doesn't really work.
Just my other thing about this, to do with the maps, is that everywhere from Edinburgh to the Midlands is referred to in the text as the Anglo-Scottish borders.
Oh, it's absolutely fucking amazing.
Yorkshire has been erased.
Apparently, Bradford is on the Anglo-Scottish border. Yeah, so the Anglo-Scottish border, once a major industrial region, Tyneside was devastated in the nuclear exchange in the autumn of 1998. Now the area is dominated by elements of the Tartan army, which retreated there following its defeat at the hands of the Red Devils. The locals live in a reign of terror. Many have fled the area, but many more have been unable to. The region has no real economy. Most people are forced to grow food for the Tartan army, but they are allowed to keep a little for themselves. The Grampian Liberation Army has risen out of this situation, but is poorly equipped. Since Tartan army reprisals are brutal, the people commit few acts of resistance. Hadrian's army is the major faction of the Tartan army. So, cities, none. Independent towns, none. Marauders, Red Devils, 1,300 men, one armoured fighting vehicle. Regional. Scottish Union faction, 50 men. Regional. Chainmail Warriors, 50 men. Regional. Nuclear sites in the Anglo-Scottish border. Barnsley, Blackburn, Bolton, Bradford, Bury, Brimsby. Ah, yes, the town of Brimsby. Greater Brimsby.
Yeah.
Hull, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Rochdale, Rotherham, Sheffield, Stockport, Warrington, Wigan, and York. It actually sounds like a DFS advert. Wigan, York, Darley-Dale, Stockton. It's just absolutely incredible. So they didn't do any fucking homework on this. So meanwhile, between Actual and Manchester, you've got the Baby Squad, the New Order, the Sherwood Rangers, Gilmore Gladiators, and my favourite, Dave Hughes Marauders. Tragically, Dave Hughes Marauders do not get any detailing in the faction section. Yet the Baby Squad do.
I know.
Fuck this book, Mal.
So one thing I find fascinating, in some ways I love The Survivor's Guide to the UK because the way it projects a future where post-nuclear Britain is essentially under the thumb of football hooligans. So on one
But
hand,
there's only 500 of them.
yeah, on one hand, it identifies a major cultural and social issue in 1980s Britain. Right, that's fine, great. We can all get on board with that. But it's just so. I have always wondered, and I would love to find out through interviews and such like, is the Survivor's Guide? It was the very last supplement for Twilight 2000 first edition. Is it a joke? I mean, I do genuinely wonder if it was written by someone who was commissioned by GDW, write the Survivor's Guide to the UK, and he's like, right, this game line is going down the tubes. I'm just going to have fun and just make stuff. I genuinely wonder. It is so tin-eared. I do sometimes wonder if it's a joke.
If designer stroke author Peter Phillips was British, I would think, yes, this is probably a brilliant joke. I looked him up to try and find some information about him. I couldn't really find anything about him or any of his input to other games. He's listed as the designer and Lauren K. Wiseman as the developer. So I think this is a case of just get your homework done and hand it in.
Yeah, I would love to know. I would love to know what the reasoning behind it, because it's so weird. It's such a genuinely weird supplement.
When you actually read the first part of it is the timeline to, the involvement of Britain in the Twilight War. And there are some more intriguing elements in there, like, Northern Ireland and Era don't get any mention whatsoever in any of the geographical section, any of the factions section, anything like that. But in the timeline area, they do get mentioned with the Troubles exploding into flame after the effective collapse of the British ability to govern, and a state of limited war developing between North and South after beleaguered Catholics beseech the Republic to intervene. So there's like an ongoing state of like low-key war between the Ulster Defence Force and the Royal Constabulary and the Ulster Constabulary, the IUC, and Republic of Ireland forces. So there is like an idea that there is like conflict on the island of Ireland as well.
Yeah.
But it's not really developed.
Yeah.
So there are some interesting ideas because, what would happen if a war had taken place in the late 90s? What would have happened to the island of Ireland when the British government basically collapsed into nothingness? But it's not expanded upon. That would have been more interesting than God bless you, Dave Hughes. I love you, but Dave Hughes Marauders and the Red Devils. And then, of course, you get the usual tedious idea that the war fails to make the royal family irrelevant, and that instead that they are a ruling force. That's always annoying. Maybe I'm wrong, though. Maybe the Gaminati in the southeast would rally to a seventh cousin 4 times removed and support him as the new king. I don't know. But I don't think the second edition ever went to the UK, so we'll never really know how that edition would have tackled it.
Yeah.
And now we've got Free League's 4th edition, haven't we? And they just thought, sod it, let's go full alternate history.
Yeah.
Keep the turn and millennia setting, which I applaud. Even if the 17-year-old in me misses the predictive aspect of the original first and second editions, because I always enjoyed that. I always enjoyed that idea of the prediction of what might go wrong based upon where we are right now. But their brief description of the UK, mercifully free of eye roll moments, I should point out, but it goes somewhere to rectifying some of Marcus Rowland's criticisms. I think there are some random encounters in there that include starving, cholera-infested refugees.
Yeah.
And another one poses a moral conundrum involving life and death decisions around some war orphans. I I think second edition tried that a bit as well. I seem to recall random encounters with slavers and other things in the second edition.
And that is stuff, even with first edition, that comes up in my interviews with people. A lot of people had these games where they did throw in these moral quandaries. It's like, if you do this, something awful is going to happen. If you don't do this, something else awful is going to happen. What exactly do you do in this situation? I think a lot of people did. It's fascinating, talking to people from both sides of the Atlantic about different ways that people played Twilight 2000 in this period. Really interesting stuff that they often subverted a lot of the expectations of the game.
It's only really because I knew that we were having this conversation that I even reflected on our time playing these games. And there's 3 or 4 different games. I mean, there was the first edition game with Jeff, which was, he just got fed up of it. Fed up of trying to be Sven Hassel characters. There was the second edition game that I ran before people went off to university that was actually good fun. It was good fun, it was entertaining, but it was serious. And then there was the slightly weirder Merc 2000 game and the follow-up where I just went hell for leather on Misery and Weevil picking and everything else. And that wasn't really any fun. But maybe playing it as a post-apocalyptic A-team game it's right for the right people. And
we played it. I remember that our first campaign of it, our characters were essentially the cast of Predator.
Yeah.
I mean, that's large. We kind of like, oh yeah, I want to be this guy that's in it and that guy.
Yeah.
I think my character was a Native American, like Army Ranger or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, we were hugely influenced by the popular culture of the time, much more so than any kind of worries about nuclear war. It was like, oh, we want to play a game that's like Predator or Commando or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, fuck it, just do Mad Max 2, but have military uniforms instead of gimp masks and leather underpants.
Largely, yes.
Why not?
Although if that's your thing, then go for it. Who am I to judge?
Personally, I probably would have the gimp mask and the leather underpants. But
Stop,
if other people
please, no, I don't need to hear that.
If other people don't want that, I understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
No, right.
Yeah, but
enough.
It's always interesting reflecting on old gaming experiences 30 years later. But that whole Twilight 2000 thing, because of its position as almost the real world, but plausibly turned upside down. But then you amplify it by the escapist tendencies of your imagination. You know what? All gaming is good and all gaming is fun to reflect on. But yeah, I think you sum up nicely in your paper when you conclude that you said in its first incarnation, that's cream. In its first incarnation, Twilight 2000 offered gamers a diagnostic probe into the future, however faulty that probe might have been. It was a future in which they could play out fantasies of power, survival, and masculinity, and this TTRPG took the late Cold War nuclear standoff's concrete reality and the apocalyptic fears that surrounded it and repackaged it for the purposes of fun and adventure at the table. Such games thus constitute the ultimate analogue, collective example of the pleasure culture of war that saw such an expansion from 45 onwards and deserve a far greater place in American and global Cold War social and cultural histories. That armchair dragoon guy should have read your conclusion. It would have answered a lot of his own questions.
Did I write that? That's actually quite good.
Yeah,
that's quite thoughtful. Yeah,
I think that's that sums up Twilight 2000 quite nicely.
Yeah,
and its place in the zeitgeist as well. I think.
Yeah, it is. And it was the thing about Twilight 2000 is it was, on its own terms, a very successful game. It was, D&D is a completely different order of magnitude.
Yeah,
always was. But in terms of that second tier below D&D, Twilight 2000 sold a lot for a role-playing game. And it's still, people are still playing first edition now. Yeah. And not just a tiny handful. There's a whole bunch of people still playing that game and have a lot of fondness for it.
Yeah. I mean, when I think back to the people that I gamed with, lots of us owned it, Whether some of them didn't play it, but lots of us owned it because it was one of those games. Even when it was reviewed in White Dwarf when it came out, there were a million games getting reviewed all the time, but this one was one that stuck out. It absolutely stood out and reflected certain interests that weren't reflected in other games. So, it was the first successful military RPG, and it did. And to give Frank Chadwick and Lauren Wiseman and the rest of the GDW crowd credit, they deserve credit for that. Yeah. They broke new ground in terms of making a game of that type actually successful and finding a significant player base and having a vast longevity. Yeah. To its credit, it wasn't the revised Recon.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about
Less
that.
said about that the better.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, Mal? That was our experiences in the Third World War.
It was
the
indeed.
Books of John Hackett, Twilight 2000, a couple of other bits and pieces. So, once again, lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming to talk about these things. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, delighted to. Great stuff, thank you.
I'm actually tempted to run a game of Twilight 2000 now. Yeah. But none of the people I game with will be vaguely even possibly interested in playing a game of Twilight 2000.
That's something, maybe we can work on that together.
Yeah, why not? Let's give it some thought. Maybe Rolling in the Ruins 2027 should be a Twilight 2000 exclusive event. Yeah. We'll call it My Experiences in the Third World War, the convention.
Yeah. Oh, there's a thought.
Well, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks again.
Will do. Thanks, Andy. And if I don't speak to you before, I'll see you on the 6th.
You will indeed.
Brilliant.
Many thanks to Malcolm for returning to Derry Toms once again. You can find his papers on RPGs and Twilight 2000 online, and I'll link to those in the show notes. You can also pre-order Cold City and Hot War, as well as the new edition of A-State, at the Handiwork Games website. I'll link to those too. At the time of uploading this, we're just 12 days out from our first date for Rolling in the Ruins, our Moorcockian RPG gathering in Bradford. More on that in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, thanks as ever to our glorious patrons. First, those without tier, Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And our Chaos Engineers, Andrew Clark, Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Spong, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Ben Hagar, Brandon Mays, Dan Charnley, Dave F., Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner-Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Jupp, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Michael Hopwood, Paul McRandall, PJ Cooper, Rex Ossius Nusquam, Roger McCarthy, Scott Butler, Simon Perrins, Steve Braun, and Steve Luke. And of course, thanks to our crafty Jugaderos, Adrian Stout, Adrian Tchaikovsky, Alexander Harris, Andrew Van Ness, Kathy Rhubarb, Chris Sharp, Christian Hundow, James Connell, Graham Holden, James Knight, Kevin Williams, Liam Turner, Lorne Hugo, Loz, Mark Buckley, Mark Hewlett, Mark Taylor, Matthew Broom, Murray Palmer, Nick Hopkinson, Ofer Ziv, Ritzby Skits, Sean Twist, Toby White, Taylor Lavery, and eternal thanks to our patron demons, Action Edmonds, Alistair Davison, Andy Darby, Brian Henderson, David Lee, Derek Clunan, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Glenn Sawyer, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, Janie Stim, Jason Vogel, Jem Gilbert, Joachim Sund, Joe Monty, Johan Jarper, Jonathan Sharp, Lee Gary, Liam Jones, Marius Latauskas, Mark Hebden, Miles Reed-Labato, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, Tone Malazzo, the OG patron, Norman Beresford, and last, but of course never least, Robert McMillan. Okay, enough from me. Don't forget you can follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. We have our Patreon page too, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But until next time, wherever you are in the world, whatever's going on in your backyard, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.